All right, so buckle up because today we are taking a deep dive into global politics. And let me tell you, things are getting really interesting lately.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we're zeroing in on the Russia-Ukraine war and how America's role is, well, kind of changing, I guess you could say. And we're going to use this recent video analysis as our guide.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it's pretty intense, and it's not just about, troop movements and all the military stuff. I mean, we're gonna unpack some seriously thought-provoking stuff like accusations of like neocolonialism, even whispers of like Cold War espionage.
It's amazing how this conflict in Ukraine, while tragic in its own right, has become this focal point for so many larger global shifts.
Exactly.
What might seem like a regional issue is actually pulling at the threads of the entire world order.
Yeah, and this video really drives that home. I mean, it starts with just the current state of the war itself, and you follow this really closely too. So
Yeah.
we're talking about a stalemate that's just dragged on for 3 years now, with millions of lives lost on both sides.
And the video emphasizes that this isn't just a war in the traditional sense of two sides battling it out.
Right.
They argue that Russia's invasion was a calculated move to seize territory and resources, backed by a propaganda machine that really tries to muddy the waters.
Yeah, and despite all that Western support, Ukraine hasn't been able to fully reclaim its lost territory. I mean, they had some success pushing back in 2022, but now it's just this grinding war of attrition.
And here's where things get particularly interesting, and this is something the video really digs into.
Okay.
The 2024 U.S. election, with Donald Trump's return to power, seems to have been a major turning point in how this conflict is playing out.
Oh, absolutely. Trump campaigned on, ending the war in a single day, and now his approach seems less about supporting Ukraine and more about, well, strong-arming them into a deal that might not be in their best interest.
Yes, and the video details this proposed minerals deal, where Trump is demanding 50% of Ukraine's natural resources,
Wow.
oil, gas infrastructure, you name it, in exchange for continued U.S. aid.
It's a pretty shocking demand. I mean, the Telegraph even labeled it economic colonization.
Yeah.
It reminded me of how The Economist compared Trump to a mob boss demanding protection money. It's definitely a far cry from the kind of aid agreements we're used to seeing.
It's more than just a departure from the norm. This isn't about assistance.
Right.
It's about asserting control. And Zelensky has been very clear in his refusal to sign. He stated that he won't burden future generations of Ukrainians with such a deal.
Yeah. Which brings us to that incredible White House meeting that was broadcast live.
Oh, yeah.
It basically devolved into a public argument between Zelensky and Trump. I've got to say, it's not every day you see that level of tension play out on the world stage.
And the video highlights how this meeting wasn't just about clashing personalities. It was almost symbolic of how global power dynamics are shifting.
Right. Zelensky came in pushing for those security guarantees from the U.S., arguing that Putin has broken ceasefires and signed agreements over 25 times since 2014. He even brought up how Ukraine voluntarily gave up its nuclear arsenal in '94 based on security assurances from Russia, the U.S., and the U.K.
And it's a valid point. Ukraine took a huge leap of faith back then, a leap that unfortunately doesn't seem to have paid off given the current situation.
No, it hasn't, but Trump seemed completely dismissive of those concerns. He basically brushed off Zelensky's pleas and then went right back to demanding half of Ukraine's resources.
Yeah.
And that's when things went from tense to just plain bizarre.
The video analysis draws some interesting parallels here to Trump's broader approach to foreign policy. They point out how it often seems to be a mix of bullying tactics and a lack of understanding of the complex geopolitical realities.
It's true, the video shows Trump interrupting and belittling Zelensky, even calling him a dictator at one point. He told Zelensky to move fast and accept the deal or risk losing his whole country. It felt like he was trying to publicly pressure Zelensky into submission.
And it's impossible to ignore how this ties into some of Trump's past actions, his impeachment over soliciting foreign interference in the 2016 election, his constant praise of Putin, even siding with Russia against Ukraine at the UN. It does raise some questions about his motivations.
Speaking of questions, this is where we dive into that whole "is Trump a Russian agent" territory, which is a pretty major part of this video analysis.
It's certainly the most explosive claim the video brings in, former KGB Major Yuri Shvets, who alleges that Trump was actually identified as a potential Russian asset way back in the 1970s.
Wait, hold on. Are we talking full-on Cold War spy stuff here? How does the video analysis support that?
Well, Shvets describes how the KGB supposedly cultivated Trump over the years. It started with things like Trump purchasing TVs from a known KGB agent, then escalated to a lavish trip to Moscow where he was encouraged to enter politics.
So the suggestion is that they were playing the long game, identifying Trump early on and then nurturing his political ambitions.
Exactly, and what's fascinating is that Schved's claims they targeted Trump specifically because of his personality, believing he was susceptible to manipulation. Now, of course, these are just allegations at this point, but when you connect them to Trump's actions as president, his stance on Ukraine, his affinity for Putin, it makes you wonder.
It's a lot to take in, that's for sure. But this is just the beginning of the deep dive. In the next part, we'll explore the broader implications of all of this. We'll look at how Trump's actions are impacting the global stage, the potential rise of neocolonialism, and even the worrying signs of a world on the brink of chaos.
And we'll dig into what this shift in the balance of power could mean for countries like India, which the video analysis seems particularly optimistic about.
So stay tuned for part 2, where we'll continue to unravel this tangled web of global politics.
You know, one of the most thought-provoking aspects of the video analysis is its suggestion that Trump's actions toward Ukraine might be part of a larger pattern, a blueprint for what they call a new era of neocolonialism.
Neocolonialism, I have to admit, that term always makes me think of history textbooks, but the video argues it's very much a present-day issue. So we're not just talking about a bad deal for Ukraine, we're talking about a potential shift in how the most powerful countries in the world interact with everyone else.
Precisely. And to understand why the video makes that connection, it helps to have a clear understanding of what neocolonialism actually means.
Yeah.
It's not about outright military conquest like in the past. Instead, it's about using economic and political pressure to exert control over weaker nations, often by exploiting their resources and undermining their sovereignty.
So if we apply that definition to the situation with Trump in Ukraine, the minerals deal starts to look a lot less like an aid agreement and a lot more like a power grab. He's essentially holding U.S. support hostage in exchange for control over a huge chunk of Ukraine's economy.
Exactly. And the video doesn't stop there. It points to other examples of Trump's behavior that seem to fit this pattern of neocolonialism.
Okay.
Remember his comments about buying Greenland?
Oh, yeah.
Or his attempts to exert greater control over the Panama Canal.
Oh, yeah. And those jokes about colonizing Canada and making it the 51st state, it's all starting to seem a lot less like harmless banter and a lot more like a deliberate strategy, especially in light of this video's analysis.
And here's where the potential global consequences come in. The video argues that this approach, while maybe offering some short-term gains for the U.S., is ultimately self-defeating.
Okay.
It's alienating America's traditional allies and pushing them toward forming new alliances.
That makes sense. I mean, just look at how Trump's aggressive economic policies, those tariffs, for example, have really strained relationships with Europe, Canada, even India. It seems like he's created a lot of friction on the world stage.
He has, and the video analysis suggests that this is creating a dangerous power vacuum as the U.S. steps back from global leadership. Other countries like China and India are stepping in to fill the void. It's creating a very different geopolitical landscape.
So to connect this to the bigger picture, we're not just talking about Trump and Zelensky anymore. We're talking about a fundamental shift in the balance of power worldwide.
Yes.
And this brings up a question I've been thinking about. Is this move toward a multipolar world, one where power is distributed more evenly, necessarily a bad thing? Couldn't it actually be beneficial in some ways?
That's the million-dollar question.
Mm-hmm.
And the video analysis acknowledges both the potential benefits and risks. On the one hand, a multipolar world could force nations to cooperate more. They'd have to work together to solve shared problems like climate change or global pandemics.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it could also lead to more instability and conflict as different powers compete for dominance and resources.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag with no easy answers, but there's one country that the video analysis seems particularly optimistic about: India. They paint a very positive picture of India's potential to emerge as a key player in this new world order. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, the video focuses on India's tradition of strategic autonomy and non-alignment, meaning they haven't traditionally been bound to any one superpower. The analysis argues that this makes India a reliable partner for other countries while still maintaining its independence.
So they're suggesting that India could act as a balancing force, helping to stabilize the global system and prevent things from getting out of control.
That's the idea. The video highlights India's potential to build strong economic partnerships with countries in Asia, Africa, and South America, providing a different model than the exploitative practices of neocolonialism.
It's a pretty bold vision. I'm curious, do you think it's realistic? Can India really step up and play such a pivotal role on the world stage?
That's a complex question, and honestly one that might warrant its own deep dive, but it's certainly an intriguing possibility to consider. What's clear is that we're entering a period of immense change in global politics. The old rules are changing, and the future is uncertain.
It's definitely a lot to process, and to be honest, a bit unsettling, but I think you're right. It's incredibly important for all of us to understand these shifts and how they'll impact our lives.
Absolutely, because whether we like it or not, these global changes will have a profound impact on all of us.
So to recap, we've got a potential shift toward neocolonialism, the rise of a multipolar world, and India possibly emerging as a new global leader. But there's one big question we haven't fully addressed yet, and it's the one that this video analysis really hones in on: is Trump a Russian agent? Where does that explosive claim fit into all of this?
It's a question that continues to hang over everything we've discussed, and it's one the video analysis tackles head-on.
Okay, then let's dive into that deep end and explore this claim in more detail. All right, so we're diving into some pretty murky waters here with this whole "is Trump a Russian agent" question. It's a bold claim, and I'm really curious to see how the video analysis supports it.
Well, they start by laying out what they call a pattern of behavior, highlighting Trump's long history of favorable comments about Putin going back decades. Then there's his reluctance to criticize Russia's actions, even when faced with international condemnation.
Right, and those moments definitely stand out, like when Trump publicly sided with Putin over U.S. intelligence agencies regarding Russian interference in the 2016 election. It definitely raised some eyebrows.
Those incidents definitely fueled the speculation, but the video analysis also digs into more concrete accusations, like the infamous Steele dossier.
Ah, yes, the dossier. It alleged all sorts of compromising information about Trump and his dealings with Russia, but wasn't a lot of that debunked.
Some aspects were proven inaccurate or exaggerated, but several key claims have actually been corroborated by subsequent investigations.
Hmm.
For example, the dossier alleged that Trump's campaign had colluded with Russia to influence the election.
And the Mueller investigation, while it didn't establish a criminal conspiracy, did find evidence of Russian interference in the election. It seems like there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle.
There are, and the Mueller report itself explicitly stated that it didn't exonerate Trump. Plus, the Senate Intelligence Committee's bipartisan report concluded there was ample evidence of contact between Trump campaign officials and individuals tied to the Russian government.
So it's still very much an open question. But even if we can't definitively prove a direct link between Trump and the Kremlin, the video analysis makes another interesting argument that Trump's actions have objectively benefited Russia, regardless of his intent.
That's a really crucial point. They highlight how many of Trump's policies, whether intentional or not, have aligned with Russia's strategic goals. His decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria, for example, created a power vacuum that Russia quickly filled.
And you could argue that his efforts to sow discord among NATO allies have also weakened the Western alliance, which definitely plays into Putin's hands. So even if we can't label Trump a Russian agent, in the classic sense, the effects of his actions have been pretty similar.
Exactly, and that's why the video analysis concludes that Trump's presidency, regardless of his personal intentions, represented a major victory for Russia.
It's a pretty sobering thought. It leaves me wondering, where do we go from here? What does all of this mean for the future?
That's the big question, and unfortunately, the video analysis doesn't offer any easy answers. They present the information and encourage viewers like yourself to draw their own conclusions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I have to ask, what are your takeaways? We've explored some really complex and honestly concerning topics today: war, neocolonialism, potential Russian interference in U.S. politics, and this unsettling shift toward a new world order.
It's a lot to process, but I think it's a reminder that as citizens in this interconnected world, we can't afford to be passive observers. We have a responsibility to engage with these issues, to dig deeper, ask critical questions, and form our own opinions based on evidence and reasoned analysis.
I completely agree. The world is changing rapidly, and the choices we make today will have lasting consequences. It's up to each of us to stay informed, engage in thoughtful dialogue, and work together to create a more just and sustainable future.
And if there's one key takeaway from this deep dive, it's this. Be wary of those who seek to divide us, who exploit fear and prejudice for their own gain. Our collective strength lies in our unity and our shared humanity.
That's a powerful message to end on. So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. The future is ours to shape.